We have got a lot of challenges at the moment. I mean, essentially, we've got this new generation of children working their way through our settings who've they've learned to swipe before they can walk. We're all born with creative potential and we have to really nurture it sensitively. It's actually frighteningly quite easy to educate children out of their creativity, when we don't allow them to make choices and decisions for themselves. The more we invest into early years is actually going to save a lot of money down the line anyway.
So true. Hello! And welcome to episode number 15 of the Tiny Shed podcast. I am Matt.
And I'm Julia.
And today, who we got on the pod, Julia?
It's Pete Moorhouse.
Pete Moorhouse. Pete is a creative genius. He's a sculptor. He is a woodworking extraordinaire. He knows loads about children's photography. He's all about creativity in the early years, and I'm really excited to dig into the chat with him.
I can't wait. You've been very creative with the intro as well. I love that.
Bringing back our names.
I know. We never usually do that. We're just
I think we've got arrogant.
Now.
We've got too famous. We think people know who we are, but maybe they don't.
I know. It's these mobs of adoring fans that keep absconding us in the street.
It's true.
It's think we're famous.
Secretly, it's all about Mickle these days. That's the. No one cares about us anymore.
It's
so I thought
we'd
reintroduce.
It's true.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And Julia, we got a lovely email in that we wanted to mention, didn't we?
We did. We got a lovely email from a lady named Helen who said some really nice things about the podcast, how it's helping her with her professional development and on her journey in the early years. It was really nice.
It was so lovely. And we shared it internally. It was an absolute highlight of my week. So thank you, Helen, for sending in that wonderful email. And I'm just glad we're playing a very small part in your wonderful early years journey. And if you have an email you'd love to send us, then please
do. If you would also like to compliment
If you would
us.
also like to make me feel good, please send us an email into tinychedpod@family.co.uk. Should we get on with the pod?
I think we should.
All right, here's Pete.
Matt, would you introduce our guest, please?
I would absolutely love to. So yes, Pete Moorhouse is a professional sculptor, author, researcher and trainer, and has a passion for creative education and woodwork in the early years. So Pete's journey started, and we're going to jump into this later on, after working with a local nursery part-time, and he fell for the early years and now runs something called Irresistible Learning, which is actually an early years creative consultancy. So very cool jobs. He's like in early years and a sculptor. I mean, that's about as cool as it gets. In fact, Pete is the chair of Early Childhood Woodwork Association and the founder of the Big Bang Project, which advocates for woodwork provision in education. He was introduced to me by the wonderful Alice Sharp, and episode 1, shout out, and has previously written for the family blog. So Pete, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to join you today.
Thank you so much.
Did we get any of that wrong?
Yeah, did we miss anything important?
It's become a bit of a tradition.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Oh, look at that. No corrections.
No corrections. That's a first, Julia.
I know, absolutely outstanding. The research team of 20 people that I subcontracted that part of the introduction to, obviously, worth every penny. Brilliant. Now,
should we get going?
Shall we?
Yeah, let's get straight into it.
So, the first part of the podcast, it's a bit of a tradition that we ask our guests if they have an ick. That is something that's not necessarily harmful or dangerous, just something that they see sometimes in settings, bit of practice, bit of pedagogy that you think, I wish that didn't exist. I wish it was different. Do you have an early years ick?
Yeah, I do get a little distressed when I see very directive teaching, and when you see that the children have made 20 identical Easter cards, and I think it's sort of like when we do have that directed learning, it does sort of just eradicate children's imagination and their ability to problem solve and use their creative and critical thinking. So that's definitely, and it happens in a lot of contexts. You might be, if you think you're doing the most innovative forest school provision, but every child is making it exactly the same tree cookie, so it's in a lot of different ways. But I think trying to give children more freedom to come up with their own ideas is just so important. So yeah, I think that would be my bugbear. Absolutely.
That's a pretty good one.
It's true, isn't it? But also I find so much, or at least back when I was in settings, we'd often do those things kind of for the parents. And you'd get this production line of like, right, it's, Christmas, so we're all going to do a card and, they send it home to the parents, and the parents will love that. And now I'm the parent on the receiving end of that. And I've got some project home from my son's kind of early years care, and I'm like, there is no way my child did that. Like, just no, there's no way. You know, you've obviously somehow, you know, masking taped that felt tip to his hand in order to force him to draw that picture. There's just no way. So
well, that's also, you've only got so much fridge space you can stick pictures on anyway. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things we always try and do is actually work quite closely together with parents to really highlight that, you know, they shouldn't have that expectation that children are going to be bringing home finished products, that we want to put a lot more of the emphasis into their, you know, their explorations and their investigation sort of like phase of the process part of the art making is just, you know, to value that so much more. And that's a good thing to be educating parents around as well. Yeah. You know, we need to be on the same page. You know, we're both educators of the same child, you know, essentially.
I think it's such a good point about thinking like those times where you're maybe doing something as an educator or as a manager where you're like, I know this is a bit, but, you know, we're doing it for X reason. Investigate what that X reason is. And it might be that if you have the chance to sit down with your parents, as Julie says, they're going straight in the bin anyway. So it turns out you're not doing it for anyone. You've created this sort of Victorian-esque production line of children.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing as well is we want to slightly, you know, we're in a changing world at the moment, you know, like sustainability is so much more important, and thinking about, you know, so again, moving away from that dynamic where we're always producing materials to be taken home. You know, when you stop to think about it, there's a lot of children in early childhood education around the world. You know, we're talking sort of like 2 billion. That's a lot of children going to nurseries and using resources. You know, we need to, you know, be much more, you know, do a lot more recycling and not that expectation of that sort of finished product. I think is part of that sustainability agenda as well. Yeah,
it's a great shout. People are worried about the cows farting, but nobody is talking about the, you know, the plastic waste from children's activities.
It's true. Yeah. You know, I love the idea of junk modelling, but the problem is a lot of the time, you know, you mix those media materials together, you can't recycle them anymore. And like you say, you know, are we just making waste where we could do it a bit more sustainably?
Absolutely. When you think about, you know, how many settings around the world are using Play-Doh, you know, and every week making a new batch, throwing the old stuff away, you know, that's all just going to landfill. You know, we're using flour, which, you know, is a food resource. I mean, in the days of food banks, you know, we need to be more sensitive to the types of materials and resources that we're using all the time. So I'm a big advocate of children using clay, which can be completely sustainably used. You know, after each session, you can rehydrate it, use it again. You know, we've got blocks of clay that we've been using for a couple of years. You know, that's the, you know, without that waste, you know. So again, bringing that mindset in more and more these days is very important.
Love that.
What a great start to the podcast. Yeah. We're firing on all cylinders. Okay, so the opposite now, Pete. We've asked for your early years ick. What would be your early years pick? You get to airdrop one resource or one sort of philosophy or one thing. It can be as conceptual as you like.
Can't be woodworking though. You've got to pick something else.
Yeah, you can't pick woodworking. Into every single early years setting in the country. What are you choosing?
Okay, I'm going to go a little left field here, and I would say sleep.
Oh, I'm so excited. Go on.
You know, in many countries around the world, the children after lunch will have a siesta or a sleep. In Japan, it's really common. In New Zealand, in many Middle Eastern countries. And it used to be really common in the UK, you know, until sort of like 70s, 80s. It sort of like seemed to slip off the agenda. And we find that children are hanging in the afternoon. They've lost their ability to focus and concentrate. You know, we need rest. We need to recharge. And I think, you know, building in, you know, a period of rest is actually really important. It's really nourishing. Now, of course, you know, we need to work together with parents, you know, then the children might be staying up a little bit later at home. But, you know, that should be a joyous thing to have your children awake a little bit, you know, longer. So you've got a bit more time to spend with them after they've been, you know, at home, after they've been in nursery. So it's about shifting those expectations. But I think rest and sleep are actually really, really important. And I think just for children's overall well-being and also for supporting their creative development as well and their self-regulation, you know, on so many aspects. So I'd like to, you know, really bring that back, that we have a period of rest. And it's amazing how well it works. You know, in Japan, seeing children who are 6, 7 still having that hour of rest and sleep, you know, after lunch was just amazing to see.
I think we'll go a step further, introduce it in the office.
I was just thinking, that's now 2 episodes in a row. Last time with Cheryl, we had the quiet space, which you wanted in the office.
I want my escape
Now you want
space.
sleep after lunch. Just more early years to the corporate world, I think, is the answer.
I think so.
I'd recommend it for everybody. A little nap after lunch does me a world of good, if it's all possible.
Brilliant. Right, we're on to our quickfire round now, where we're going to run through a few questions. And I want to start, Pete, which is, I think, who is someone who really inspires you in the early years?
There's a lot of people. I mean, I've been so fortunate to have, met a lot of people at different conferences and so forth. I think one of the most inspirational people I've had the good fortune to work with is Tina Bruce, who's written a whole host of books on child development. She's also, a big leader within the Frobelian, network within the UK. And I did the Frobel tutor course with her, and just her insights into education, really highlighting the importance of play, highlighting, the importance of creativity, of hands-on, experiential learning, and also the importance of connections with nature. We're all part of one big ecosystem, so making those connections, that sort of sense of unity. But she is an incredibly inspirational person. I know she's had a huge impact on so many people as well, so I'm certainly not alone there. But yeah, a living legend, absolutely, is Tina Bruce.
Got to get her on the pod, don't we?
Yeah, future guest.
Yeah, future guest. Let's hope so.
Tina, if you're listening. What's the best advice that someone's given you?
Ooh, that's an interesting... the best advice. I think often it's maybe to listen more. Sometimes, I can get a little bit, I think it's part of my thing. I get a little bit distracted and lost in my own thoughts sometimes. And I think, sometimes you do have to tune in and really listen and observe. So yeah, tuning into other people, I think is good advice to make better connections with people. Yeah.
Fantastic.
I think I could learn from that as well. Listen more.
Definitely.
Yeah. I just get so excited. When you're having a conversation and sometimes you're so excited to say what you want to say that you realise you're just waiting for your turn rather than listening and having an actual two-way conversation. So I think, something for me to...
I think I'm on the same page there as well.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I think...
Save it for the performance review.
But it's, when you're talking with someone and you can just tell that they're not really engaging, are they? They've got something really good and they're just waiting to go. And then you talk to someone who's truly listening to you, and it's such a therapeutic and amazing experience. I think we could probably all do with picking a bit more of that up.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the funniest thing that a child has ever said to you? Can you remember any moments where a child has come up and tugged at your trouser leg and just said something hilarious?
No, I think for me it's often when they're playing on words, suddenly just realizing that 2 words mean different things. It might be like, a date and a date. Well, maybe not with them, but thinking about that. But, just a nail and a nail, thinking that they're both the same word and just thinking that's really funny that the same word can mean 2 different things. Just coming to that, realizing that for the first time is quite infectious. I think that, that moment of discovery and that they find it funny, really.
I love that. That is such a good point. It's a bit weird related, but I've got a friend staying with me right now who's a 9-month-old, and she ate her first blueberry this morning. And I just thought the attention to detail that 9-month-old was putting towards her first experience with a blueberry. I have not paid that much attention to anything in this year. And I think that it's such a good point. We talk about a lot on the podcast is just how inspired we can be by children, about how great they are at reminding us of how things are actually really curious, or what focus looks like, all that kind of stuff. I think it's such a good point.
I think for me, it's definitely noticing things. Like when I'm out with my sons, they'll point to something, or they'll notice something, or they'll go and pick something up, or they'll see things that I would, in my grown-up kind of jaded way of going through the world, you don't notice the little things that they still see. Like they'll see a sticker on a box and point to it. What does that mean? What does that say? And I'm like, I don't know, it's just a sticker. bigger, but these are things we kind of tune out as adults, and they still notice them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think children are incredibly powerful visual, thinkers. It's their first way of interacting with the world. That the visual language comes before words. So, and I think we often underestimate quite how powerful they are in terms of that visual knowledge. I mean, you see the little child in the pushchair. They spot that aeroplane right in the corner of the sky. This tiny little bit of movement. They're aware of everything around them, aren't they? And just really focusing into the detail and of different objects. It's really fascinating.
I love that. Lots to be inspired by. All right, Julie, over to you.
Should we? Oh, all right.
One last quick fire.
Go on then. Okay. So tell us something that you have some kind of niche knowledge about. So if you were in a room with 20 people and you were pitched against them in a quiz, what's a subject that you would win with?
I think I'd probably go for some aspect of something to do with the early years. I think would definitely be a speciality.
Oh, it's a safe answer.
Some of the media, maybe like children's photography. There's a lot I know about children's photography, and it'd be nice to share some of those, those things that children can do with cameras and how they best use them and so forth. And clay is another one as well. I think clay is one of those materials that we think should be straightforward to know how to use. Actually, there's a lot to know about it, and it used to be part of teacher training, and now it's sort of like slipped off the agenda, similar to woodwork, really. There's a lot of these media that actually there's more, quite a lot of knowledge to really, for us to be able to best support children with those, media materials.
It's bananas, isn't it, though, that we've moved away from those very tactile experiences. I mean, obviously you still get sensory play in earlier settings and you do see Play-Doh, but things like woodwork and clay are rarer, and it's those kind of natural, like clay is such a aesthetic experience, and you touch it and squeeze it, and there's something about it that is so connected to learning. Like it has a really distinct smell and a distinct feel. Why are we moving away from it? More clay.
And I think all of those things really draw children in. They draw in their curiosity. You get really high levels of sustained engagement, which is essentially what we're looking for in the early years. And I think, we have got a lot of challenges at the moment. I mean, essentially, we've got this new generation of children working their way through our settings who've essentially, they've learned to swipe before they can walk. And I think we now know statistically that children's levels of focus and concentration are in decline. Their levels of physical development are in decline. So I think even language and communication is evidence that that's in decline as well. So I think having really rich hands-on experiences can certainly, counter some of those aspects. And so I think that's, part of the importance of learning through doing, I think is very important.
And it's such a good point, like that. As you mentioned earlier, that child in the pram is pointing up at that aeroplane. They're noticing things in the world around them when the rest of us are buried with our heads in our phones. And, children become what we teach them. And I think it's such a good point. It's like, what do we put in front of them? What do we expose them to so that we can make sure we fight all of the rest of the stimuli out there that is pointing them towards that important brick in their parents' pocket. Yeah.
I think it's about smell a lot, weirdly.
Really?
I've just been musing on it as we were talking. But
you were thinking about what you wanted to say next while we were meant to be listening to Pete.
I was doing it! Unbelievable. I mean, admittedly, I sort of was, because I think, something like woodwork, which we'll be talking a bit about, has a very distinct smell, and it's so evocative. Like, if you think now, if you've ever smelled wood chip or shaving, those tiny little shavings off a block of wood, you can smell that. And it's the same with clay. There's a very specific smell, and those things are so evocative. And sure, Play-Doh has a smell. I suppose sand has a smell, but those kind of really natural, fresh fragrances, they're so poignant in terms of latching a memory onto them and latching learning.
Can't smell a
onto
TikTok,
them.
Can you? Not yet, at least.
You can't. Well, not yet. No. Well, maybe in the future.
No, you're absolutely right. They're totally multi-sensory, aren't they? It's the smell, it's just the texture, the sounds that different elements create. It's a full-on holistic experience, definitely.
Yeah, there's immersion to it, more so than just a swipe.
Yeah, very true. Right, so we're into the pod now. We know, Pete, about your love for clay. We know about your hate for directive teaching. Maybe unusually so, 15 minutes or so into the podcast. Do you want to start by explaining a little bit to those listeners who haven't heard from you before about your journey into the early years and the slightly odd angle that you came at it from?
Yeah, well, I guess, it is, quite a serendipitous sort of journey. It was certainly, quite an accident, really, that I ended up in early years. So I was trained as a sculptor, creating large steel sculptures for public, for roundabouts and hospitals and so forth like that. And then I started working a little bit in education with high schools and occasionally with primary schools, but involving pupils, co-designing public art projects to get them really involved in creating something as part of their infrastructure of their community. And cool. Then I guess a head teacher of a nursery school sort of like heard that I was, working with schools, and she'd just been to Reggio Emilia and had seen the preschools there, where every single school has a permanent artist in residence. They've long since seen the value of artists supporting education. So she decided she wanted to have her own artist. She'd seen how successful it could be. So she contacted me and said, would you consider doing an artist residency in a nursery school with the 3 and 4 year olds? I thought, oh no. What on earth? And 3 and 4 year olds.
No, I will not.
I thought this is, but I was too polite to say no. But to myself, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to give this 2 days, and then I'm going to say, look, I've got more important stuff to be getting on with, sort of thing. Anyway, within those first couple of days, I was just transfixed by just how imaginative these young children were. They don't have preconceived ideas about how things, should be. So they're so expansive in their imagination, which is exactly the headspace that I need to get into as an adult artist. So I felt actually there's more I could learn from the children than I could possibly teach them. And when children are focused, it might not be for huge lengths of time, but when they are in that zone, that's exactly the same sort of headspace that I need to be, that sort of like that level of focus and immersion in what they're doing. So it was a beautiful beginning, and I just thought, this is really exciting, a really interesting age group that I'd completely overlooked before and had not seen the potential. So 2 days became 2 weeks, became 2 months, became 2 years, became 20 years, the journey. So it was a very much unplanned career. And now, to be honest, I'm probably doing about 1% sculpture and 99% education. And I agree that's been gradual. I mean, I will eventually, when I sort of retire from early years, I probably will go back to doing more of the sculptures, because it is a big passion of mine. But early years has definitely taken over. And bit by bit, I was asked to do more training for different organizations, and that's really snowballed. So I do a huge amount of training both within the UK and overseas. Also do a lot of research now as well into children's creative development, different research projects onto photography and woodwork and things like that, and also do lots of writing. So it's become an all encompassing sort of journey, but it's a joyous community to work with. I think it's incredibly special, and I think it really does feel a real privilege to work with young children. They really are treasure, in our hands. It is a huge joy.
I think it's so interesting that you have that outsider perspective. You said it yourself there, right? Like this was a sort of a section of society almost that you overlooked, and you thought, oh God, I don't know if I really want to do that with a bunch of 2-year-olds, and yet almost immediately you felt like I could learn a lot from these young people. Not only that, the community around these young people is so amazing compared to maybe the art community, a bit more cutthroat or so on. What do you think we can do to help implant that idea of what the early years is really about, when we know we have this respect issue in the early years? We know we have these underfunding issues. Like, what do you think we can do to make more past Pete's become present Pete's in that sense?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in terms of society, I mean, it's all the evidence is already out there. I mean, we know that, the more we invest into early years is actually going to save a lot of money down the line anyway. So it's only when, governments start to really understand, the evidence that's out there and invest, properly. I mean, it's interesting, when I go around the world seeing a whole variety of different settings and types of provision, I think clearly the smaller the class, the higher the ratio of the teachers within that environment is going to give more quality. The higher training that the staff have that are working with the children is going to give more quality. So both of these aspects require more money being invested. But we know that, when you do invest, the outcomes at the end of primary, the end of secondary, and as lifelong learners is going to be vastly enhanced. So it's a huge benefit to society. So I think it is so misguided not to be investing not a little bit more, but a huge amount more. I mean, I really think, massively more investment is needed. So that's, would be my plea. But I think the other thing, my other observation, coming from the world of the arts into education, particularly in early years education, I think it sort of dissipates as you slightly go up through the years, but it is an incredibly special community. I mean, the way that I've been welcomed, in different early years groups, it's a very collaborative way of working. Essentially, we're all working in the best interests of young children. So it's a very collaborative, cooperative type of environment. Whereas, ironically, within the arts, it's often quite competitive. It's one gallery pitching against the other. Is this art better than that art? There's all of these hierarchies sort of like involved in the art world. How much is a piece of art worth? All that sort of like monetarization of art. So as I think, the early years is a very, very special community. And I think, it isn't, the highest paid of professions. And people who generally work in the years, put in a massive amount of commitment and effort. It'll be the early years teachers will give up their Saturdays to come up to training. They'll go in, spend their evenings going on webinars. At the Sundays, they'll be going for a walk, collecting resources to bring into the nursery on a Monday morning. It's a really, committed workforce. They deserve, a huge more recognition and monetary sort of like, recognition as well, and investment in their professional development. So there's so much more we could be doing.
I couldn't agree with you more, Pete. That's a rousing call to arms.
Yeah, I
You
love
just need to
that.
play that directly into the Treasury office.
You've got to be careful if I start ranting.
No, it's perfect. I couldn't agree with you more.
Absolutely. Do you know what? You spoke about something there about researching children's creativity, and I wanted to ask a bit about, again, kind of going back to this perception of early years from people who aren't actually in it. Do you think we, as a society, kind of undersell children's creativity, either the importance or their abilities? Do you think we just don't get it unless we're in the early years?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting because I've done a lot of research around creativity, and most of the academics who write about creativity start at children about the age that children are sort of like in primary school, like 6, 7. That's when they start talking about the creative journey. Whereas, creativity is we're all born with creative potential, and we're immediately building the foundations, through hands-on exploration, through our literal play, symbolic play. We're building up these languages which are gonna establish us as lifelong creative and critical thinkers. So it's an incredibly important time for children's creative development, it's one of those very delicate things. We have to really nurture it sensitively. It's actually frighteningly quite easy to educate children out of their creativity, when we don't allow them to make choices and decisions for themselves, when we are directive, when we don't give them encouragement or positive feedback. So it's a sensitive journey to really nurture that creativity.
It's true, isn't it? Gosh, I'm sure we can all remember at least sort of one instance in education where you've thought, oh, brilliant, this is my idea, I'm going to do this. And you've been told, no, we're not doing it like that, or you've done it wrong, or, the idea you've had is wrong. And it's these little kind of, I don't know what you'd call them, that kind of chip away at your confidence in your own creativity and your own ideas. And I think you're right. We have to really kind of nurture this ability to have confidence in your own ideas and creativity.
That creativity, it is more important now, really, than it's ever been before in history. The world is changing. It's changing incredibly rapidly, isn't it? I mean, we just think what's happened in the last 20 years. I mean, it's been pretty astonishing. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 20 years? I mean, it's sort of like the world just seems to be accelerating with, the AI generated information, all of the algorithms. It becomes more important that we're able to think for ourselves, that we can use our critical thinking skills to try and discern what's manufactured and what's original content, what's truth, what's fiction. It's a really complicated world that children are going to have to navigate. And, we're increasingly going to need creative thinkers, innovators to come up to these, to find solutions for this increasing, challenges that we're facing in society. So creativity, I think, really, really important that we create these solid foundations within early years, because if you don't get those foundations in place, it's a lot harder to build on, to become more creative later in primary and secondary. It's almost, we got to make these neural pathways, the neural networks, highways within the brain to build upon.
It's so true. It's like, I always think, like, if find me a tenured creative director or a brilliant artist or some problem solver in the sciences, you can trace a pathway probably back to a child deep in thought and where their like fragile creativity was nurtured and not shattered, kind of, as you mentioned earlier. I think it's so true, and that's why the early years is so important, isn't it, after all?
But it's like what you were talking about at the top in terms of not having these kind of in-the-box thoughts. Children are a lot more open-minded because either they haven't discovered a restriction yet or a rule or a problem they couldn't solve. So they do have this very kind of expansive way of looking at a problem that, maybe we do kind of lose a bit as adults because, we've had those, like I said, those kind of ideas chipped away at a bit.
Yeah.
Right, Julia, why have you dragged me away from that wonderful conversation with Pete and put in my hand what can only be described as a whiteboard marker and a piece of paper? What's going on?
It should only be described as a whiteboard marker. That's what it is.
Right.
I will tell you exactly what we're doing. So we are getting creative. Okay, so the podcast this week is all about creativity, and as you know, every week we're sponsored by Family, the early childhood platform.
Sure.
So we are getting creative with the ad, and with your piece of paper and your marker, I want you to draw Family.
You do realise podcasts sort of primarily an audio first? No?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
So, we only have 30 seconds. Are you ready?
Sure.
Ready?
Yeah.
Set. Go! Okay. I don't hear a lot of drawing, Matthew.
I am doing more drawing than I did the last time on the really bad take 2 minutes ago.
Well, you don't need to tell people about that behind the scenes. I'm
very bad at drawing.
Yeah.
It's not good. My job is like being in charge of brand, and I'm so bad at drawing. That's why I have designers.
Are you saying you have problems with creativity?
Massive problems. Why do you think I got Pete on the podcast?
Oh, Pete. Oh, dear. Let's do Okay, right. I haven't stopped. Okay, now I've stopped. Right. Matthew, let's see yours.
This is a village.
Okay.
Because it takes a village to raise a child. And to help connect your village, you need family. Connect parents, educators. It's sunshine, it's rain, it's a hut.
If only we had a product called Village that you could have nailed that analogy to.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Oh well.
You can also join our Early Years community called Village.
Julia, over to you. What did you do?
Brand director Matthew Arnrich there.
Thank you very much.
I've drawn a happy classroom. Look, there's 2 happy educators, maybe a manager, few happy children.
Very nice.
No iPads or computers in sight because they've already finished all their admin work.
That's nice.
And
okay.
now they have time to play with the children.
Nice. Well, if you would like the 3-dimensional version of Family that actually adds value to your life, go ahead, head up to our website, family.co.uk/demo, and you can get a free demo of our product today. Now, back to the pod.
Oh, I don't know. Should we give these away?
I don't think anyone wants these.
All right. Well, never mind. Competition in the bin. Back
Sorry.
to the podcast.
Bye. But let's imagine, Pete, we've got someone listening to this and they're like, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm in. This sounds great. Like, algorithms taking over the world, creativity important. They go back to their own setting and they're like, oh, you know what? We are doing something a bit. We're not doing this the best we could possibly do here. Like, in as tactical a way as possible, what are some of the things that you think, educators, managers, leaders who are working in nurseries can do to look at the own way they're managing creativity in their settings, and how can they improve it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think essentially, we have a lot of focus in the early years about meeting certain learning outcomes. How are children progressing in their physical development? How are they progressing in their mathematical development? How are they progressing in their literacy? Very little effort is dedicated to how are children developing and applying in their creative development. And I think this is such an important part of child development, especially, as I say, creating those foundations for lifelong learning. So we need to put a lot more focus onto, making observations about what children's starting points are, because they are going to be quite varied. The experiences at home are going to vastly, will differ. So we need to tune in to certain children who do need more input to draw in their curiosity, that spark of inquiry, really, to find different sort of resources and experiences which are really going to engage them. But then also we need to make sure that children are making progress in the year with their creative and critical thinking skills. So again, having a framework with which you can do that, I believe, is really, really important. So that's one thing. I mean, I've written a lot about that. I've developed what's called the holistic creativity framework, which essentially looks at what are the skills that children need in order for their creativity to flourish. What can we do as teachers in order to allow children's creativity to flourish? And then how can we monitor progression? So that's a lot. There's information on my website. We can give the link at the end. But the thing is, but what can we actually do in the setting? It's really about, as much play as possible. Children, flourish through using play, and naturally through play, children will be, generating ideas. They'll be problem solving. What can I use to represent, a shield? And they'll use a plate, or block becomes a telephone. All that sort of representational stuff. So much, communication, negotiation in play, but then lots of open-ended resources as well. So block play, the clay, woodwork. Work with loose parts, all of these materials that are just open-ended, that allow children lots of opportunity to use their imagination, generate their ideas, and problem solve along the way as they create what they want to make. That's just gold dust, And the way I evaluate how effective things are is essentially sustained engagement. If children are remaining there for significant lengths of time, we just know higher order learning is going to be happening. If they're there for 2 minutes and they're flitting over and they're going to somewhere else for a couple of minutes and they're going somewhere else, and there's all this traffic, we know something needs to change. We need to, make the materials and the resources more engaging, that they really just draw children in. And I often talk about making learning irresistible, but that's what it is about. It's kind of like, you just can't help yourself but get stuck into, these wonderful art materials, or, wonderful selection of blocks to get creative with block play, getting your hands on the hammer and saw and nails and getting going with woodwork. It's just sort of draws you in and, unleashes, that whole host of, creative and critical thinking skills when you're given that freedom.
Absolutely wonderful. I think you answered. My next question was going to be, what does great look like? But I think you've already answered that one so eloquently, Pete. So I think we'll definitely link out to your framework in the bio of the show notes as well. But I'm interested just on that. You mentioned that you feel like creativity, you've sort of assessed some of the skills that underlie creativity as part of that framework. What are some of the things that you've identified that educators can work with as some of those sort of foundational skills that ladder up to creativity?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. When you start to dig down, creativity is phenomenally complex. That's part of the beauty of creativity as well. It's part of the beauty of existence. And we don't have all of the answers as well. There is a little bit that's unknown in the process. But there are a huge amount of elements that really combine together to enable our creativity to flourish. But initially, a lot of those core dispositions, our attitudes to learning, our habits to learning are really important. So, how resilient are we? Do we bounce back when things go wrong? Do we realize that putting in more effort can actually pay dividends? So we have those dynamics of perseverance and persistence. Do we really, how curious are we? Because curiosity is one of those things. It's an innate disposition, but some children lose that a little bit. But no, curiosity is such an important building block for creativity. And then those creative thinking skills. Are they able to develop multiple ideas upon a single issue? Critical thinking skills, what are they observing? What are you noticing? To reflect on that, to learning through trial and error, reflecting on your learning, evaluating what you've done. These are all ways in which we can, elements that contribute to that creative process. And also collaboration is really important. Creativity flourishes in groups, when we're bouncing ideas, off each other and so forth. So complexity. There's a lot of different elements essentially for observing.
You're making me think a lot about the things that we need to get better at in our creative team, Julia.
I'm enjoying this idea of the resources being irresistible. It's putting me in mind of, sometimes when you go into, I'm picking out Reggio Emilio inspired settings because you mentioned them earlier, but so often the resources or the invitations to play are arranged in such a way that as an adult I think like, oh, I want to get my hands on that magnifying glass or touch those glass beads or do that painting or whatever. And how we lay out our setting, there's so much to that in terms of fostering creativity. And maybe you don't have all of those kind of lovely resources, maybe your setting doesn't have that budget, but there's always an opportunity to set things out in a way that inspires kind of curiosity or imagination I love that.
And a lot of things can be done on a very limited budget as well. I mean, you think about, trying to get lots of natural materials into a setting is really positive anyway. But if you think about sort of like natural loose parts, so, collecting some pebbles, some little tree sections, little tree rings, some little bits of branch, some...
A season for conkers as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And just doing placing, arranging with those. But they're so tactile, aren't they? The pebbles, the smoothness, the coldness, it just draws children in, feeling the grain on the wood.
Lovely shiny conker straight out the shell. Ooh.
There's something about that, isn't there?
Oh, I'm going to go and look for some conkers on my lunch break, I think.
I think I want to kind of transition a little bit into talking a bit about woodworking. And I think it's really interesting. I think you have this interesting perspective that I'm thinking about, which is Play-Doh and things like this are so, like, they're everywhere. You find me an early years setting in the country without some form of Play-Doh in, and I'd be very surprised, right?
Yeah.
But it is interesting how we also have some of these tactile media that are not so common. Clay being one of them that you've already mentioned, but another one being wood and woodworking. And I wonder why you think it is that you run up and down the country, you'd find settings with Play-Doh and with paper and with pens and probably with some sort of blocks, but it's so few that have any kind of woodworking tools.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when early years and primary schools as well were first established, going back to the 1900s, it was really common to have woodwork. It would have almost been the exception to come across a nursery school or elementary school that didn't have woodwork benches and doing woodwork. I think, to be honest, it was a little bit, we are going back before women had the vote and things were quite stereotyped. So the boys were orientated to woodwork area. The girls would be doing needlework, work with sewing and weaving and things like that. But they really valued hands-on learning. It was like the manual skills. It seemed to be really important. Making was big. It was the backdrop of the Industrial Revolution. Sure. Every household would have had a tool kit, would have had a sewing kit. We had to be able to make and repair things ourselves. It was part of culture. Along the way, particularly in the 80s and 90s, over fearfulness of litigation, of made settings very worried of any activities that had an element of risk, and it was perceived that woodwork could potentially be a risky sort of activity. Fortunately, things have really changed in the last 10, 15 years. There's just been a sea change of thought, and there's been a real realization that children need to be given opportunities to embrace risk and challenge, obviously within controlled limits, because that's a really important part of child development, that we need to be learning how to make choices, decisions, judgments to best protect ourselves. If we wrap children up in cotton wool and deny them those opportunities, they're going to be much more susceptible to accidents when they meet new situations. So this is really, really important. So now actually we're seeing a massive resurgence in the number of settings that are embracing woodwork again. It's quite astonishing, particularly in early years. It's just been incredible how many settings have now set up their woodwork area, got the woodwork bench, got a few tools, and everybody feeds back. Initially, before they did it, they were a little nervous. Everybody can think of a certain child. Oh my goodness, what's Mario going to be like running around with a saw? It just makes us all feel. But everybody says, once you've actually got it, and you see children are just. Focus. When you're working with tools, you can't operate a hammer or screwdriver or saw without actually being there in the moment. You have to be focused and concentrated. So it draws children in a very powerful way. And it's also, woodwork's a really awkward material to work with. It's not straightforward. So it's also got this real level of cognitive involvement. How am I going to join this bit to this? How can I change the shape of this to be how it needs to be? Which of all these weird offcuts is best going to work for what it needs to do to suit my imagination? So it's this combination of physical concentration and this cognitive concentration just lends itself to really extraordinary levels of sustained engagement. And often after children are familiar with the tools, it's not unusual for children for a child to spend the whole morning just tinkering away at the woodwork bench. And I don't know any other activities that children will spend that length of time. Everything else is an hour and then they're ready to move around and do something else. There's just some sort of magic in the woodwork bench which can just draw you in. Just one more bit, just going to add this bit to here, and it's quite exciting. I think it's quite a profound experience, and children love it. I mean, that's what's really attracted me to promoting woodwork so much. It's just that you see just how they're really developing their self-confidence, that sense of agency, that self-belief that they're getting as they're getting that sense of mastery, the pride in it, in what they're making. It's an intoxicating mixture where you just see children flourish. It really is a joyous thing to get going. It is one of the things that is probably the trickiest to really embed in a setting, because there is quite a lot of information to know, really thinking about the basic health and the safety measures, but also what types of wood, what are the best types of tools. There is quite a bit of information that the teachers really need to be aware of before they get started with woodwork. But as I say, it is a really engaging material to work with.
I'm fascinated by this kind of hand skills kind of topic, because I think it is so important, because not everybody has the luxury of an upbringing where you have a parent or another adult in your life who can show you how to mend or repair things. And if you're fortunate enough, as I was, to have a parent who can show you how to, use a screwdriver or a hammer or nails or whatever, then as you're an adult and you have to assemble your first bit of furniture or you have to repair something, you possibly have those skills either in your mental toolbox, or well enough how to find that information out and then translate it. Okay, yes, I remember, I know how to do this. And it's the same with sewing. We worry about fabric waste and sustainability. And as you mentioned there, possibly, those subjects were a little bit gendered. But sewing is a really useful skill. You get a hole in your trousers, you can fix them. That's a brilliant thing to learn. And, is there room, I think, for more of that in the early years? And I think probably, I love that.
You've hit the nail on the head, so to speak. But no, I mean, sorry to hammer the message home.
Oh, Pete.
But no, essentially, through experience with things like sewing, with woodwork, children are learning to make and repair. That's so important in a culture which is dominated by consuming and disposing. So in terms of sustainability, hugely important, isn't it? So, and as you say, once you've experienced, threading a needle and putting it into the cloth, that becomes part of your DNA. Once you've hammered a nail into a piece of wood, these are long-lasting memories. You can't take those memories away. They're just part of what you can do and what you've experienced. So I think sadly at the moment, the majority of children do go through their entire education never touching tools. That's in early years, primary, secondary school. There's a lot of secondary schools and primaries don't use real tools anymore. It's an expensive subject to run. They tend to focus on media and computing and things like that instead. So and as I say, unless you've got a parent who's passing on some of these skills at home, it makes it a very inequitable education system, really. So I think, the early years is a great place to introduce those. And those settings that have done, it's just joyous, sewing, little cross-stitch hoops with some hessian and stitching in there with sewing on some beads. Again, high levels of focus and concentration and engagement.
Let's go back to my sort of Kool-Aid drinking listener right now who's all in on the...
I'm not sure I'm on board with this analogy.
Well, we'll go back to it. I'm sticking with it. Who really is like, that sounds fascinating. Sort of hours, really focused play. Yeah, that sounds good. I can imagine. I really believe in this. But maybe they don't even know how to hang a picture on their own wall. Like they're not necessarily some DIY guru themselves. Like I know you've done lots of work and lots of literature and books on this stuff, Pete, but how do you think about encouraging that person to start? Because sometimes getting to the end result is so far away we don't even know how to start. Where would you pick things up?
A lot of people working in early years, perhaps aren't so confident with working with tools themselves. So, being expected to sort of suddenly introduce something like woodwork can seem quite daunting. And I think for that reason, if people can access a professional, training day, you have some woodwork training, certainly it is a wonderful way to give them confidence. There is, the book, Learning Through Woodwork, which is a lovely teacher's resource in terms of taking you through everything you need to know. And there's even an online training course, which is a really nice option. It's almost 8 hours of video tutorial taking you through everything you need to know. So people from all over the world have done that online training course, and that we can give the link afterwards, but that's on my Irresistible Learning website. So that's a nice way of people being able to access that training. But yeah, there is quite a bit to know, and I think in terms to get the most out of it, it does make sense to get more knowledgeable about it. Absolutely.
And maybe even thinking about your own journey, Pete. If you are an educator or a leader out there who's thinking, I'd really like to do this, but maybe there is a parent who wants to come in half a day a week to. Because they themselves are a carpenter, or and you can work with them on the training. Like I think that is a really great. I see a lot of settings do that as kind of an access route to saying, okay, can I get some inspiration in here, and then we can move forward from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've seen several settings where a retired parent or grandparent has come in and just sat themselves down at the workbench and just been there just to be an extra pair of hands, help support something every now and again, but just to help support that area has been really nice.
They did that at the playgroup I went to. That was in the 1900s, though. I grew up in the 1900s. But yeah, a lovely gentleman who was a friend of one of the people who ran it came in and did woodwork with us. We made little doll's house furniture. Amazing. I remember it now, so it must have been,
I love it. I think there's really, I know
experience.
this is maybe this is a bit of like a hysteric point or something, but I remember I got to judge. I've been lucky enough to get to judge on the NMT Awards for a few years now, and I remember
didn't invite me.
There was one awardee for sort of, I think it was like nursery personality of the year, and it was the caretaker who came in and like their job was just to clean up and like look after stuff, and then slowly but surely this wonderful man just became involved in. He did gardening with the children, and and I do think, especially when we know so much of the workforce in the UK is female, I do think there's an interesting potential role for like that. Either grandparent role or father role, or people to come in and not necessarily they're there full time, but be able to be there as part of doing some of these experiences that like clearly so important for children.
Yeah, definitely.
I had one last question I wanted to ask Pete, because we are getting quite close to the end, and this is a very random.
Matthew,
I know. It's hard to believe. time has absolutely flown. This is a little bit of a random question, but I was listening to this podcast recently with a creative researcher who's working with Rick Rubin, the famous music producer, and he was talking about how Rick Rubin's creative process is finding clues. He watches YouTube videos and he goes to art galleries and he listens to podcasts, and it's all about finding clues, and eventually he puts together those clues to create his kind of creative work. And I think what I was thinking about with that is I think that's a lot of what educators and managers have to do. They have to find clues in their life. And then, as you say, they're out on the common on the weekend and they pick up some pine cones and take those back. And I wondered, Pete, how do you go about finding clues for your art and for your work? What are some of the things that you do?
Yeah, no, I mean, for personal creativity, I think it is, creativity doesn't happen in a vacuum. We're stealing ideas from here, we're remixing ideas from there, we're experiencing different art forms, mixing those together. So it all becomes, quite a nebulous sort of like mix of ideas that we sort of like start combining and making connections between different ideas, and then from those generating new concepts and new ideas. So I think it's definitely been open to new concepts. I think for me, in terms of being creative, time is a hugely important. So it's eking out extended periods of time where you're not going near your phone, you're not going on the computer, the telephone's off the hook sort of thing. So you can just focus and wallow in ideas, but then also just to give yourself the freedom that you're not necessarily going straight for the destination. You go on digressions. Oh, well, let's see if I combine this idea, where might that go? Even if it seems a little ludicrous at first, but just to explore it and play with, essentially it's about being playful. And that's why, it comes back to what I said at the beginning, that I felt I got so much that I could learn from young children, because they are so playful. They are making connections between, different areas of learning. I mean, I had a young lad, he came into the setting, and he was always dressed in a Star Wars t-shirt and things. He loved doing his woodwork. He was always at the woodwork bench. Anyway, one day he said to me, Pete, what I'd really like, he was always telling me about Lego that he was doing at home and making spaceships and stuff like that. And anyway, he said, what I really want to do, Pete, is I want to join Lego with my wood. And I'm thinking, oh, you just can't do that. That's outside of my box. That's sort of like, they're just incompatible sort of media, But, for him, it was, why not? Why can't I try and join these things? So I said, I wasn't quite sure what to say. So I said, okay, let me think about that for a bit. Anyway, my kids are grown up. So I took in some of their Lego into the nursery. His eyes lit up. He immediately took it over to the workbench. Then he's testing it out. He gets a little saw and starts sawing the Lego. And to my surprise, it actually cut really beautifully. And then he's tested the drill. He drilled little holes into the Lego, and before you know it, he's hammering bits of Lego to the wood, bits of wood to the Lego, and just having this amazing creative experience. I mean, I'm not advocating that we give children saws and they chop up whatever they want, but sometimes it's lovely to let the magic happen and just to see how they can make unusual connections between different areas of learning. That's the joy, isn't it, of creativity, of creating something new. What an innovative thing. Who else has made a project with wood and Lego? So we can learn a lot from children. Absolutely.
It speaks to the freedom that he had to do that, though. Because imagine if he wasn't in a setting that had that environment where he could go in and say, I want to connect Lego and wood. That's an opportunity that's been afforded to him by the setting, saying, okay, we're going to have an environment where these things are possible, where these ideas can happen, and not just happen, but he's allowed to kind of experiment with it and play it out and see what happens when he has that idea, and will it work and will it not? And I mean, that's magic, isn't it? Like that's what the Early Years is about, I think.
Yeah.
I think we started off this with you talking about all the wonderful things you can learn from children, and now we finished off with such a lovely story of what you could, even you as a sculptor and artist, Pete, sat there and went, Lego and wood, no, they don't go together. What an amazing journey of like what children can teach us. They can help us think outside the box. So I absolutely love that. Pete, before we finish off, if people have listened to the end and thought, wow, that guy really knows what he's talking about, I'd love to work with him, Where can people go to find more about you? Where can they book you for training? What can they do to engage with you more?
I've got a website. If you just Google Irresistible Learning, it'll take you there. And there's loads of free resources. There's lots of free handouts about woodwork, free handouts about photography, free handouts about creativity. So lots of things. You don't have to buy anything. Just go and have a look. And as I say, if you're interested in the online training course for woodwork, that's the information is on that as well. So
amazing, wonderful. We didn't even get into children's photography. We might have to have you on again another day, Pete. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No, it's a real pleasure. Really lovely to join you both.
Thank you.
Cheers. Ooey wooey wooey. That was good, wasn't it?
It really was.
That's my latest noise. What did you think? I'm being creative, Julia.
I love it. I mean, creativity is important.
As we've just learned.
Less so with the noises, maybe.
But seriously, though, less nonsense. Let's get into how great that was.
It was. I'm so inspired.
I'm so inspired. I'm inspired to just go and paint and make art, and I'm very, very excited about going through all those lovely creative things with my own child. So I think really good stuff from Pete. I loved every minute of that.
It was another one of those episodes where I feel like we could have just talked for hours and hours and hours, and we have to cut it down to podcast length, and I just want to keep going.
We'll get him back.
So, yeah,
part
we will.
Two. Part two with Pete. We didn't get into photography. So many things we didn't get into. Pete part 2.
Pete part 2. Absolutely.
What else should we say? Well, if you want to get in touch with us, as Helen did, and we mentioned at the start of the show, please do send us an email. We absolutely love to receive them. We shared that email from Helen internally here, and it really made a lot of people so happy. So please do email us if you're loving the podcast, or share with your friends, send it to more people, and of course, reviews on Spotify, that sort of thing.
Right, it's a
really
lovely review, yeah. Not
nice,
a bad review.
No bad reviews.
Only nice reviews.
Only nice stuff.
Don't get creative with the reviews.
No creativity, please. Only happiness.
Absolutely.
And with that, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.